When you go to the post office to post your letters and packages, or when you receive posts in your houses or offices, you will notice a colorful, well-illustrated piece of paper measuring about 20 by 25 millimeters attached to the edge of the mail. This is the postage stamp. Now, because of its miniature size, many people often ignore them. But these are arguably the most powerful modes of visual documentation ever created by any given nation. My name is Clem Akpan, and welcome to this presentation. I will demonstrate that through intrinsic visual analysis of the graphic configuration of postage stamps, the history of Nigeria's development from primitivism through missionary imposition, colonial conquest, nationalism, decolonization to contemporary existence can easily be reconstructed. But first, let's explore the genealogy of this simple but powerful innovation. William Dockerer and Robert Murray first invented what is known as a handwood stamps in the 1680s in London. Their idea was advanced into adhesive stamps by Sir Rowland Hill in 1840. From then on, other nations developed theirs. Switzerland in 1843, Brazil in 1843, United States of America in 1845, etc. And by the 1860s, postage stamps became commonplace in many nations. These stamps were invented primarily to display on items of mail as evidence of payment postage. To many people, the relevance of postage stamps does not extend beyond its function as a mere piece of paper that facilitates the posting of items from one location to the other. However, a closer inspection of the visual configurations of postage stamps proves otherwise. Stamps possess extensive visual powers that can invoke the historiography of a nation. According to Danny Reid, stamps are visual forms of documentation and communication, while Stanley Braun and Paula Rianto argues that stamps are territorially and politically grounded, thus provide insights into the evolution of a country. These theories are postulated based on the premise that if you look at postage stamps, they bear an overarching national currency, since its designs often appropriate features and cultural forms particular to a specific nation. Nigerian postage stamps, right from its emergence in the colony of Lagos, valorizes these assertions. In 1852, British Imperial government established the postal service in Lagos to facilitate communication between the colony and Britain, marking the origin of postage stamps in the colony with distinct designs. Portraits of British imperial heads such as Queen Victoria, King Edward VII, King George V, etc., and colonial officers dominated the designs of stamps distributed from 1852 to the 1910s in both the southern and northern protectorates. The overarching appearance of imperial faces on these stamps provide vital insights into the conditions of colonial oppression, subjugation, and imposition during that historic period. What you see on these stamps is a deliberate flaunting of imperial powers and prowess as a strategy of intimidation and control. This is because between 1850 to 1910, colonial administrations faced fierce indigenous resistances which impeded imperial exploitation of the colony's resources. This led Britain to adopt military force to dismantle all indigenous resistances, the result of which culminated in the Benin, Ijebu, and Arochukwu expeditions of 1897, 1892, and 1901 respectively. Basking in its victories against various ethnic oppositions and kingdoms, Britain sought to impose its authority firmly on the colonized. Thus, the domineering presence of imperial faces on these stamps is a visual record, a poignant reference to the frosty relationship between the colonizers and the colonized that ensued after such expeditions. This imposition of imperial faces of authority on Nigerian stamps constituted a visual declaration of Britain's authority, supposed superiority, as well as ownership of the colonized Nigeria. From 1910 to 1950, one notices radical transformations in the content of postage stamps. Firstly, the imposing portrait of the Queen was reduced in proportion, and in most cases, only her crown was incorporated. Secondly, stamps began incorporating Nigerian themes, including images of its topography, culture, and identity, as well as the consciousness of the time. The question, of course, is why did this happen? And what forces inspired such radical design transformations? These stamps hint at the fact that certain economic, political, and transnational cataclysmic forces were reshaping the relationship between Nigeria and Imperial Britain at the time. Their visual configurations and illustrations provide insights into those historic paradigms. From the 1900s, returning Africans and Nigerians trained in colonial Western schools formed powerful pressure groups in Lagos and began mounting coordinated anti-imperial protests in Lagos. Pressure groups such as the People's Union, headed by Dr. J.K. Randell and others, organized several protests against the exclusion of blacks from colonial governments and imperial racism. They sent delegations to London to champion the fight against colonial subjugation, oppression, and cultural destruction. Their contact with Pan-African activism in the West further galvanized their anti-colonial resistance. Back in Nigeria, they organized more protests against land tenure bills, water rate levies, as well as revolts against seditious ordinances. They formed several political parties, fostering anti-imperial propaganda to hasten the dismantling of colonial rule. Furthermore, during this period, the emerging Nigerian states equally witnessed women resistances like the Ijebu women revolt against tax imposition in 1909 and the Aba women riots of 1929. The sum of these indigenous uprisings began altering colonial policies and regimes as Nigerians pushed for more recognition. It is apparent that the incorporation of elements of Nigerian culture and peoples on these new stamps was forced upon Britain by local resistances. The visual configurations of these new stamps hold in them insights into indigenous socio-political revolts against imperialism at the time and the records to documentation of the socio-political paradigm shift which such revolts gave rise to in Nigeria. (1955 to 1975) witnessed more dramatic changes in postage stamp designs, inspired by nationalism consciousness and the battle for liberation. The most radical change was the complete disappearance of portraits of the Queen of England and all paraphernalia of imperialism on these stamps. Rather, there is apparent emphasis on the emergent nation and its identity. These stamps contain illustrations that celebrated pan-Nigerianism, cultural heritage, Nigerian topography, and modern infrastructural development, etc. More significantly, the portraits of British queens and kings were replaced with those of Nigerian elites and nationalists, the vanguards who led the battles for emancipation from colonialism. The displacement of the British Queen from these postage stamps was an indication of the end of colonialism. 1950s was the crescendo of nationalism political activism, which involved intense anti-colonial, anti-European, anti-imperial, and decolonization advocacies and propaganda, which ultimately culminated in Nigeria's independence in 1960. Nationalism, influenced by the doctrines of Pan-Africanism and negritude, promulgated cultural pride as a mechanism for fostering the dismantling of colonial rule. Thus, by promoting Nigerian identity, cultures, and peoples as recorded on these new stamps, it provides visual references to the use of cultural pride by Nigerians at the time as a tool to foster decolonization and emancipation from imperial subjugation. The increased appearance of Nigerian nationalists on these stamps indicates power shifts in the late 1950s. It was a record of the celebration of the victory against colonialism, Western domination, and cultural imperialism in Nigeria. In essence, its visuals capture the dismantling of colonialism and the elevation of Nigerians to positions of control. Stamps distributed during this period equally provides insights into social and civic issues at the time, most noticeable of which is the Nigerian Civil War of 1967. The visual configurations of stamps produced during the late 1960s are vivid references to the cruelty of the war, destruction of lives and properties, instability, insecurity, and the sufferings of the masses. They paint poignant pictures of the divisions, unrest, political skirmishes, and military impositions in post-independence Nigeria. What you see on these stamps is an overt documentation of the darkest phase of Nigeria's modern civilization. The conceptual paradigm of postage stamps designs developed during the independence decades through the 1970s constituted a template upon which all design layouts of Nigerian stamps were and are based till date. Stamps continue to record social events, contemporary issues, celebrate political leaders and elite Nigerians, as well as promote the identity of the Nigerian state. It is obvious, therefore, that beyond evincing payment for postage, stamps visually document the historiography, modernity, and identity of a given nation. As demonstrated in this documentary, through analysis of the visual configurations on postage stamps, the history and development of a country can easily and effectively be reconstructed. Thus, next time when you receive or send a mail, take a long look at the postage stamp. In your hands, ladies and gentlemen, will be a visual documentation, a piece of the history, development, and contemporary existence of a given country.